If I can just have you say and spell your first and last name and then give me your title.
Chris Felton, Chrisfelton, and this Detective Sergeant.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So obviously, you guys let out that Facebook post yesterday showing all of these weapons that you seized from a 16-year-old here in Fort Wayne. Talk to me, when you see a 16-year-old with those kind of weapons, what does that tell you about the level of youth gun violence in Fort Wayne?
Sure. Unfortunately, we've had an increase over the past few years of gun violence involving our juveniles. We're seeing them younger and younger committing murders, and just the gun possession we're seeing among our youth has increased over the past 3, 4, 5 years. And we're no longer just seeing our youth possess handguns, but now we're seeing them possess all sorts of rifles and machine gun conversion devices and just lots and lots of ammunition, more so than we've seen when I started in this job about 6 years ago. And so it's alarming because it's getting younger, the amount of violence we're seeing. And not only the amount of violence, but the type of firepower that we're seeing younger and younger.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to take a educated guess onto why you think that's been ramping up so much in the past couple of years, what's the difference?
A lot of it comes from social media. A lot of it is social media. It's a lot more accessible nowadays than even 10 years ago. And that's where a lot of these come from, the status and the power of flashing guns and the type of guns and their machine gun conversion devices and the money that comes with it. And during COVID, when we saw so many people basically confined to their houses 24/7, we really saw that social media aspect of almost bragging about what you have at home increasing. And then the youth that were already kind of gang involved, being confined to home when schools were closed, everything was closed to do, kind of flocked together more and more and got together to increase the amount of guns. And that's when we started seeing the 3D printers coming around a whole lot, 3 years ago. And the 3D printers being able to create firearms at home, and not only firearms, but firearms parts, the machine gun conversion devices. Initially, when the 3D printers were becoming a thing in schools and libraries, society didn't really know that you could make guns on those. So we had to go to the schools and libraries and shop classes and say, hey, if you see your youth making these things, these are firearms. So it's a whole education campaign. So just kind of social media has been huge into just the culture of bragging the guns and firepower, and the money has really led to that increase recently.
Of course. Now, I know that you're a part of the Gang and Violent Crimes Unit, but I guess I want to ask, and I know you can't speak about this specific case, but all of the youth that you guys are kind of finding with these weapons and these guns, are they always connected to gang ties, or what's the ratio there?
It's hard to say because in Fort Wayne, in most cities like Fort Wayne, we don't have the national gangs like the Bloods and the Crips and Latin Kings. Your Chicagos and LAs have those hierarchical structured gangs. Cities like us have hybrid gangs where they're anywhere from 3, 4 to a dozen kids who live in a neighborhood together, go to school together, will bond together for some of the traditional reasons that kids join gangs: lack of family structure, they want that security, that love, that friendship. And they'll be in that smaller group gang for a few months, then something happens, they disagree about money or girls or guns, and they get in a fight with each other and start a new offshoot gang of a smaller group. And so sometimes they don't necessarily always fit the traditional definition of a gang with a structure and a leader. They're more of the group of kids together. And when you don't have, I guess, the structure and hierarchy of the national gangs, we see our young gangsters be a lot more reckless and violent because they're competing to be the leader of the group. They're competing to have everyone else fearful of them so they can call the shots. And then someone else wants to compete for that spot. So we see a lot of violence within our own gangs here sometimes. So it's hard to pinpoint to say, yes, formally they are a gang, because that doesn't always meet the statutes or the traditional definitions. But it's very rare, I don't know that I've seen ever, just a random juvenile with a bunch of guns who's not connected at least to that type of lifestyle of the money and the drugs and the flashiness, if you will.
Of course. Now, I know in the department's Facebook post it says that you guys are serious about ending youth violence here in Fort Wayne. You know, beside this recent raid, or whatever the technical term you guys call it, what does that action look like?
Sure. We work as much as we can with, juvenile probation and ACJC and the schools as much as we're allowed by law to try to stop violence. A lot of violence and disagreements happen in the streets that carry into schools, and then start in schools, carry into the streets. So trying to get ahead of any violence when we can to prevent it from happening, but also realizing sometimes the only way to keep kids safe, either somebody who's got it out for them or who we have information from an informant or other ways they're planning violence, is unfortunately to lock them up just for that short time, to keep them off of the street so that they're not being shot at or doing the shootings. And which is not, it's two-edged sword, because you don't want to put youth in the system, because once the youth gets into the system, it's usually just bad things from there, which we absolutely don't want that. But sometimes if we're not getting support from the families or the community, we don't have any other choice but to get that youth off of the streets, to keep them safe and to keep those safe who they're disagreeing with, if you will. And so it's trying to, that's kind of more the enforcement side. Just the education side of, we want, parents and guardians and people to know that you don't just go from being a 16-year-old playing video games to all of a sudden possessing guns and rifles and handguns and everything. There's always those warning signs that somebody is down that pathway to gang involvement or gun involvement. It doesn't just happen overnight. So we need the community and the families to be aware of what your kids are doing and who your kids are hanging out with. If you know your kids are hanging out with people who are flashing guns on social media or have guns or bullets in their car, keeping your kids away from that lifestyle. And if you notice your kids are starting to go down that pathway of, the flashy money and jewelry and guns and gang signs, being the parent, being the guardian, and getting them off that pathway as well, reaching out to the services around the city, contact us, contact juvenile probation. There's resources out there to help get kids off of that pathway. We just need people to be more aware and help us stop this, these things from happening, basically.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my next question. When you're finding these kids so young that are, having these weapons in gang activities, what responsibility falls on the parents? I know you say that you guys are kind of pleading for parents to kind of help them kind of situation, but is there any type of legal responsibility that when you find things like this, is there an investigation that happens to just make sure that the parents didn't know or have any involvement, or walk me through that?
Sure. And so unfortunately, sometimes we see parents buying guns for their 15-year-olds, which is highly illegal. So we will be looking at those cases and pursuing those cases. If we can show that the parents or the guardians knew their kids had guns around the house, we're going to start working with the prosecutor's office to start filing cases on that for neglect as well and sending them over for review. Because again, it's not uncommon for us to do these types of search warrants or encounter youth other ways with guns, and it was apparent because there's, in general, just firearms pieces or bullets all over the house or all over a car or something. It's like, how could you not have known what was happening? So we are going to start working with the prosecutor's office more and more to pursue those cases as well.
Yeah, what do you say to someone, a teen or adult out there, that may feel like, I have to have a gun for my safety? I live in a neighborhood, in a part of town where I don't feel comfortable being outside without a gun. What do you say to them?
It's a hard situation. I've been here 18 years, and I have spent the first 12 years of my career working Southeast, third shift. And the overwhelming majority of people at Southeast are great people. They're fantastic people, and that's why I loved working there, because I love the people there. And sometimes that's been their family house for decades, and they don't want to move out of the area where there's a little bit more violence, or they can't afford to move out. And so we realize it might be hard to live in those parts of towns out of fear of the gun violence. But when we hear parents say they're buying their kids guns for their kids' protection, you're just enabling the kid to go out and be in the violence. If you're that afraid that your child is going to be targeted by gang violence, again, reach out to the police department, reach out to juvenile probation, reach out to youth services. There are different services out there, even some community groups like churches that have resources to help get people out of that lifestyle and away from the fear. And sometimes it might take moving across town, staying with family somewhere else to get them out of that immediate situation, but then just having those conversations that having this gun for protection, it's just enabling the violence a lot of times. It's not protecting anybody.
Yeah, no, of course. Now, I know this most recent case, and we don't have to speak on the specific of it, but it included equipment to make a Glock fully automatic. For people at home who may not understand, how dangerous is that?
They're extremely dangerous. There's different devices that you can put on Glock style handguns or AR type rifles. A Glock style handgun is designed to shoot 1 round per trigger pull. They're semi-automatic. That means you pull the trigger and it goes boom once. And when you put a machine gun conversion device, it basically it's a thing you attach to it, and it interferes with how the gun is supposed to work. And then when you pull the trigger, it keeps shooting bullets until it's out of bullets. So people who have these high capacity magazines with a machine gun conversion device on just a Glock handgun, you can shoot 1,200 bullets, per minute, which is extremely dangerous. Not because of the amount of bullets it's shooting, but they're extremely inaccurate. So sometimes we'll see people go try and do violence with that type of handgun, and they try to point it at a house. Well, you can't control that thing because it's so small and it's firing so quickly. Now it's bullets are just going everywhere, and that's why we're seeing all these other houses getting struck and innocent bystanders just walking down the street getting hit because they're so dangerous because of the amount of rounds, and they're so hard to control, and they're very illegal both federally and locally. Those machine gun conversion devices.
Have you been seeing more of those in Fort Wayne?
Over the past 5 years, we have seen an uptick in those, yes, as well.
Now that you got in this most recent case, those guns off of the street, what is the ripple effect for the community? Talk to me about that.
When we're able to have an investigation on anybody, whether it's juveniles or even our adult, citizens who engage in the gun violence, and we're able to make a significant, take a significant amount of weapons away from that individual, sometimes it's enough to get that person into the system and force them to start getting some type of rehab or some pro-social activities in their lives. But other times, it seems like there's so much access to weapons on the street, either from burglaries or thefts, or now these 3D printers that can make guns, or a lot of people again are doing the straw purchases where they're purchasing guns for their kids or for somebody who can't buy one on their own. Sometimes it's not long before, if they are part of that organized gang, they're having guns again. So then it will encounter that person again down the road, and now the charges elevate once you have those prior convictions for unlawfully possessing handguns, if that makes sense. So sometimes we can make that short-term dent in the acute violence if we know this group is disagreeing with another group and get their firepower away. But sometimes it's hard because it's not long before they're able to access, we're right back to square zero, or square one, I guess.
Of course. Is there certain parts of the city or neighborhoods that you guys put special alert out on to just keep watch because you're seeing more youth violence or gun violence coming from that specific part?
It's all over the city. There's nowhere, it's not unique to any part. Our gang members travel all over the county, not even just the city, all over the county to do their violence. We'll look at sometimes the stats of the previous month. This area had all these reports of gunshots. So we might have more just proactive patrols in that area. But as far as targeting special areas, we go where the gang members, where the violence takes us, which is all over the city, sometimes all over the county. And we're not limited to just Fort Wayne. We'll go all over the county. We'll go all over the state if we need to get those violent people off of the streets.
Yeah. And I think last question for me, aside, because just talking to you, it's pretty evident that you care about your job, you take it very seriously. I don't know if you have children yourself, but when you hear about these young men or women that are out here heavily involved in either gang violence, gun violence, just from a person aspect, just even away from the job, how does that make you feel seeing, this 16-year-old who, obviously I don't want to speculate, but it's already going down a path that doesn't look good?
It's heartbreaking because A lot of even our gang members or our juveniles that are arrested for murder, a lot of them, when you get them into a room like this, they're just kids. They're just kids who a lot of times didn't have a chance to grow up in that pro-social environment or weren't ever told there are other ways to make money or to settle disagreements than gun violence. And so it's heartbreaking to know that that's out there. And then sometimes, how do you take somebody who's been in that world for their first 15 years of their life and now try to get them into the pro-social path? It can be hard. And it's heartbreaking when you see the violence and the aftermath and going to these shootings and homicides where there's juveniles, that have been shot, even adults that have been shot. It's just a sad situation all around. Knowing that any one of us could be driving your car down the street and again, an errant round comes from a shooting somewhere or something. It's just sad altogether, especially with the young kids. And for me, like I said, working Southeast for so long, there's so many good people down there. And it's just sad that some of them, for various reasons, can't leave the community, and then they have to deal with the violence that small percentage does in their backyard, basically.
No, of course. Is there anything else you want to add that I might have missed or left out?
Just for parents, guardians, grandparents, when you see your kids on that pathway to gang involvement or gun involvement, intervene early as quick as you can. And if you don't know what to do, call the police department, call youth services, call a church, call ACJC. There's people out there that have resources and information to help you get your kids off of that pathway so they don't become the next homicide victim or being arrested for murder and spending the next decades of their life, incarcerated.
Of course. Thank you so much.
One more question for you. You touched on the manufacturing of devices to convert these guns to full auto. Is it a crime to be in possession of these things by themselves?
Yes. The devices that convert the Glock-style handguns or the rifles to full auto, they're the size of a quarter, roughly, maybe a $50. But just that possession of that device on its own is a possession of a machine gun per federal law and per state law. So you don't have to have that device with the handgun also. If you just have that little device in your pocket, that's possession of a machine gun. It's very highly illegal.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank
Awesome.
you so much.